Good morning, everybody. It's Simon Payne from Punk Incorporated here. In the third of the interviews that I've been doing, I have Marcus Kirsch with me today, who is the author of The Wicked Company and talks about wicked problems. So, Marcus, how are you today?
Hey, Simon. I'm pretty good.
Pretty good?
I'm just recovering from sneaking out last weekend to run my first marathon, which I was supposed to be doing in Paris, but so I ran somewhere through London, and so I'm a little bit recovering from that, which is pretty good.
Okay.
But generally, I'm doing probably what everyone else is doing, sitting at home, trying to work, trying to be positive, and talking to a lot of people about what the future might hold, really.
Well, look, the book's brilliant, and what I'd like you to do, just to kick things off, is tell us a bit about your background, where you came from, and why you decided to write this book, The Wicked Company.
Yeah. So my background originally is both in design and technology, as I worked in sort of innovation for mix and design technology for many, many years. In my recent history, I worked on a lot of change and transformation projects with a focus on service design and design thinking. And so I led and participated in projects for HSBC, BT, nationwide. So bigger corporates, bigger organizations that all want to be more flexible. They want to be more customer centric, and they wanted to be more agile or flexible in order to react to an ever changing market quicker and make a bit more sense of it. So I built teams and I introduced new tools and in particular new culture and processes. And that's sort of what I do.
Okay, and so where did the book come from? Where did all this thinking around? Why did you need to get this thing out, do you think?
So I think there's two things. One is that my background in design has always been looking at innovation and quite a bit ahead. And I came across a lot of organizations that didn't quite have the maturity, and I knew they needed to step change. And how do I lead into a step change? How can I do that? And the best way to do this is normally you have a good story, you have a good narrative that's underpinned by insights and data. But the story has to be right, because you have to talk to people. You have to convince them that the new thing is not scary. It's actually great. And therefore, that's all communication. So design and the narrative around that and communication is one aspect. And the other aspect is my technology background. So growing up through the dot-com boom and seeing how that failed and picked up again, and what characteristics those technology had, especially the network technology. For me, it was quite clear quickly that it is a very systemic thing. They're all systems, right? They're not linear things that you produce or mass produce. They're actually more like exponentially. They behave way more complex, and they keep behaving even after you put solutions in there. So that kind of different way of looking at things and different solutions that requires needed also different ways of working.
Okay.
And I thought, I think I have a good opinion on that. But I want everyone else to understand that as quick as possible, because otherwise we're just going to be chasing small steps, and we want to be there where the interesting stuff and the good stuff happens.
Great. So, I mean, from what I've read in the book, you do take us on a bit of a journey as far as technology and service design and innovation. And you give us a bit of background of where you've come from and where it's come from, which is really important. But then you begin quite quickly to start talking about the human side of it, the language, even the people, the culture. So I think that's quite interesting to understand how within your career, how soon did you move away from, okay, I can build it, we can, all the clever design people can do all the technical aspect, but something's not working here. Why do we need to focus on the people more? What changed there? When did you start noticing that?
Yeah, so I would say that as a designer, you tend to focus more on people and their behaviors, because the people and behaviors define the way you should design something. Right? So for designer, naturally, this is very important. But design as itself has been maybe a bit of a niche for products. It's always there, but very few companies have a very strong design focus. example, Apple. Everyone tries to
Mm.
emulate Apple. Everyone has a hard time doing so because it's hard to focus on that or really translate that right. So I was always interested in that. But especially when I came to London to do my MA, and we looked more at technology and things you can do there with technology for people, we always started with people and their behavior.
Okay.
Because
Right.
those behaviors were so rich to really dig into new opportunities for products and services. So we would not say like, oh, here's a piece of tech. Let's build that and then throw it amongst people and it's going to be super good. No, we always said like, let's have a look at a problem. Let's say how much time you have or how you travel, all these things. And then let's see what behavior actually exists today and what people might actually like to do in the future. And then use that behavior and build sort of storyboard and a story around it. And that then led to the product and service required. So a bit the
Mm.
other way around, right? And
Mm.
this other way around thinking comes more with the designer. But growing up through the dot-com boom and looking at a lot of companies being very focused on the technology being the
Yeah.
silver bullet and the value proposition, for me, that didn't make sense. And then you would see a lot of companies fail to actually get better value through new technology. So even
Mm.
after whatever system you would buy for a company, it wouldn't guarantee success for the company. Why? Well, it's not just that you have a hammer; it's actually what you do with it, right?
Mm.
So that was the difference, and that was always the thing I try to tell people that, look, there's a really big value here, and this is how you unlock it.
Mm.
So in terms of the Wicked Company or the book, The Wicked Company, so that looked at the fact that back in the days, the Industrial Revolution solved a so-called tame problem, which is different to a wicked problem. So
Uh-huh.
tame problem is one that you can gather enough information about it. It's fairly controlled. And when you create a solution and you put the solution out there, problem is still solved. Best example is building a bridge. Building a bridge, like let's say the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, is a very, very high complex project. So the complexity is not what makes it very challenging. It's a tame problem because you can measure it all up. It's a bridge from A to Z. You build it, it's there, it's done. After the bridge is built, problem still solved. It will not change. People
Mm.
will use the bridge. There's no more challenge here. Now, a wicked problem is something more like the crime rate, or obviously, as we can see now, fighting something like COVID-19.
Mm.
This is a problem where we don't quite have a lot of information about it. While we're working on a solution, we're still gathering more and more information, and that will come in and it will shape our solution. And once the solution is out there, then it's not the final solution ever because it keeps changing the problem still because it
Yeah.
keeps
Okay.
evolving. That's the thing. It's like a moving target, essentially. A bridge is not a moving target, but a pandemic definitely is. Now, because we have technology that is very networked and systemic, even our problems like building an app or providing a banking service now is actually quite systemic the way you should be able to use it as a customer.
Mm.
And that means our world is starting to be full of more and more wicked problems.
Okay.
But if you have a tame business, if you have a company that's tailored to solve a tame problem, you will struggle to solve a wicked problem.
And yet, so where we're going, we are
And that's the
encountering,
difference.
so more businesses are encountering wicked problems, but dealing with them in a more structured, old-fashioned, tame way. I've got this, interestingly, you're talking about behaviors then as well, which I think is, understanding the behaviors of your customer and trying to add value there, and then thinking about what they need and then building it. Well, I think more businesses than ever in this current climate are going to be struggling with that because so much is going to change so fast. I mean, there's a little passage in your book which I think sums it up lovely. We live in a deconstructed new reality. It is everywhere. Its higher complexity seems overwhelming for tame and linear thinkers. It looks exciting and full of opportunities for wicked thinkers. You can be tame or you can be wicked. So, how do we be wicked? What do we need to start doing? Where do we go? Obviously, read the book, but
Sure.
give us,
Then talk to me.
yeah. So how are these in this current climate where
Yeah.
we don't, from my own personal perspective, in learning and development, I need to think about the end game, the new world of training, the new world of
Yeah.
how people want to do things. How do I become a more wicked thinker, do you think?
Yeah. So a lot of it has to do, again, it's the story. So can you identify what you're actually looking at? What characteristics are the kind of thing you're looking at? And if you know that it is a moving target, that by itself, not thinking that, right, we're going to gather some information, or we think we already know enough about it because we've been in this business for a long time. We understand the problem, right? So you're not even challenging the problem. That's
Mm.
already a mistake. That's a tame approach, right? Where you think you already know that. Any of the companies out there that have more of a wicked approach, like Airbnb, good example. So Airbnb, I've been talking to one of the design directors, and she was saying, we know that we are on a continuous journey. We know that whenever we put a new solution out there, there will 4 or 5 new problems coming out of that. It's a bit like a hydra, right?
Mm.
So you chop one head off and 3 more appear. When you know that, you're prepared. When you don't know that, you think you're done after you've done the first solution. And that's a really good example to show the maturity of a company and I've seen this a lot, where you apply design thinking and service design, and then you do one solution that you put out there, and then the business thinks that's it. Oh, we're customer centric. It's like, no. The reason or the thing you just put out there has just further changed what the behavior will be around it. So for example, if you're building a website and say, you know what, we're not going to have 2 buttons, we're going to have 3 buttons now. So people are not going to press on 3 buttons. You're going to have a lot of different things appearing, not just that you get more people pressing the 3rd button, but less people the 1st button. And maybe some people are confused by 3 instead of 2. And you have all sorts of other issues there, right?
Yeah.
If you have teams that can run experiments to then figure this out very, very quickly, which things work best, which buttons to make bigger and different colors, and which thing works best, and you can experiment that, then you're actually capable to get to the best possible state for you as a business, to be as successful as you can be with what you're trying to achieve with the customer. So, and it's obviously, complexity is one aspect, but it's really knowing that this thing will move, it will evolve, and because it's evolving, you have to keep learning. So constant learning is an aspect of that. Constant learning should not be done in, we're going to do a workshop once a year and we're going to build up a couple of extra capabilities. It's actually, you're more like in a science experiment these days, where you throw out 10 or 20 different designs to different segments of the customer, and you literally ask by putting it out there, and depending on the data you're getting back, you go, okay, you know what, this works best. So we're going to take that, going to bin the rest, and we're going to further evolve that. A friend of mine reminded me that, because we were talking, and I kept saying that companies often struggle with looking at design thinking in an iterative process that the designers in particular are doing as a never-ending research piece that never gets into real life. And it's not quite true, because what we're actually trying to do is like very quickly design something like in a day or 2, and then put it out there, quickly test it, and then de-risk it when it's still cheap to bin it.
Right.
Because if you have it fully developed and a big feature-rich thing, and you put it out there, it gets very expensive and very risky to pull this out or take it away. So you do lots of little incremental things, and you have developers and designers work hand in hand together. Then you're getting into really, really good dynamic to test 500 things a month. And
I mean,
that's the kind of dynamic you sort of need as a business, and it's very doable.
And we were talking before we kicked things off about the distance between people, the strategy of the organization, and then the design aspect of it, of building it, and that can be problematic in itself. And again, thinking about kind of where we are now, I'm sure there's a lot of organizations where suddenly their strategy, which was solid and tame and predictable, is now thrown right up in the air at speed. And yet they're saying, so we need to build new stuff, we need to get new stuff out there. Where do you see the problems in the gap between strategy and the people building it? Do you think Do most companies, are they good at it? Will they make sure that flows all the way through, or have you experienced problems there before?
So yes, there are quite a couple of problems there in classic organizations that I see, and the solution is probably as complex, so that there will be varieties depending on the size and the culture of an organization. You will have probably different solutions for that in the future. However, some of the typical issues are, if you start someone on the top with a bigger business, overall top line business strategy, and you have, okay, we've got 3 pillars, we have some assumptions on where we want to go with this, and this should be pushed. Then what should be happening is that while this is handed down as projects or individual tasks and things to do, it needs to have a feedback loop back up. So whenever you further find something out on all these stages down to the field, and you get more insights, this should be able to circle back and go, let's check in. Not unlike when you have a startup and a startup does a pitch and you have first round investors and they look at it and go, how are you doing so far? It's like, well, we got our first customer and it's this, but the model is not quite there, but the interface is not quite there. So we're going to test a bit more, and then we see if we can grow more. It's like, well, let's come back in 3 months, or let's come back in a couple of weeks and see where you're then once you tested that. And that is quite iterative, the way they then get funded. So even like when they get funded for like 5 million, and it's often in stages, and this kind of iterative approach to the budgeting is actually an interesting thing to look at for organizations as well. So generally, when these things start on top and you get more and more information, that needs to be able to be checked, either back up, which would be one way, which means you're kind of squishing this together. So you have some communication artifact or something that happens that actually can communicate back. The probably more scalable way is actually to really put self-organizing teams in place.
Right.
So that's a bigger shift. That's a bigger shift of governance, where you basically say, look, I give you guys a problem. You're a cross-disciplinary team. You can de-risk this. You can test it, so that I don't have to make the decision up there, because it's a higher risk. You can de-risk enough that I'm happy with you just to make, for the next 6 months, make tons of decision on this, test this to the extent you need to test it, and use any means in order to get where we want to get to. Or tell me early enough when you find something and say, I don't think this is going to fly, this is going to go, this is not going to be, this is either too expensive, or we tested it now with 100 customers and it's just not the thing they want. Then we need to pivot. Can we pivot? Yes. So, they need to be able to feedback, and they need to be able to pull the plug on it potentially, right? That's quite a significant shift for companies, but it's actually a very valuable thing to do. So self-organizing teams, there's now more and more case studies to show that people are more productive because they feel more ownership about what they're doing. They're happy at their job. And before you know it, the whole kind of McKinsey statistic on, less than 40% of the workforce is actually halfway productive. In those companies, it's raised productivity by double digit. So it's something of a high value. So letting go and trusting your workforce is important. But what you have to do at the same time is that previously they've been sitting in all these silos. You have to let them actually get the information they need in order to have a better decision-making process. Because you're holding all the information previously. You have to give them now everything you can. So you need to enable them, right? And there's quite a couple of books that start talking about these different leadership models of saying, stop being a decider, be an enabler.
Right.
So that's that's sort of a big governance shift, I would see, in terms of the way the information flows, what decisions the teams can make, how to enable them, and how that can flow back so that you can learn more and more and more about the problem you're trying to solve as an organization.
That's awesome. And one of the things that I guess when we talk about that sort of process and they can get it all in place, it makes sense to me. I understand it. And but of course, some of that is speed, isn't it? It's got to work well and fast, again, especially in the current climate where you've got to pivot really quickly. So again, one of the problems that I've sort of come across, I guess, in that sort of process would be the communication part. So we were talking about the sort of things in that feedback loop go wrong, okay, particularly, let's say, the language of
Mhm.
understanding to keep it flowing
Yeah.
all the time. So from your perspective, what needs to change in the language, in the way this feedback is happening to keep it working at pace and well, do you think?
Yeah. So, and I think that problem comes a lot from, again, goes back into the history. So there's a reason why in the book I start sort of with the history of Industrial Revolution
Mm,
to really describe how severe, how big the gap really is. That's the main reason why I did a bit of a history lesson there. And it's interesting to see that during a great solution during the Industrial Revolution was to silo people into all these skill silos, right? It worked really well because you could make mass production happen with the absence of robots and bigger machines because you only
mm,
had people. If the people were too skilled, they were too expensive. So you need cheap labor. Cheap labor you produce by de-skilling them. Just give them a very simple skill to learn. That's all they had to learn. They were cheap labor, and you could hire thousands of them to mass produce. Problem solved. Great solution for the time. Now doesn't work because you have silos of all these people in organizations, and they only know one thing.
mm,
So in order to then really let them do that and let them work at speed, you need to let them think. And if they only know one thing, they can't really do that because they feel intimidated by making any decision. Because often, the governance sits there and the boss sits there telling them normally what to do. And as much as their boss then tells them, no, I want you to make your own decisions. Like, well, I've only seen just one narrow thing of the thing I need to
yeah.
solve. I can't do that. So the speed, and the speed comes through letting people, simple speed increase is this, yeah. Reduce the governance level. So you have organizations who have started to remove layers of project management because they realize they don't really add anything to it. They actually add a lot of time to it. So again, self-governing or self-organizing teams don't have to wait for 2 or 3 managers to meet in a meeting, then discuss it with the more limited information they have, and then come back with a solution that the team then goes, no, hang on a second, you're missing the detail there. It's like, well, we decided this now, so you have to do this now. And again, so again, it goes to governance. But again, the governance also you can only enable when you start having people being able to communicate better. And the silos, unfortunately, have produced all these different languages. You have the strategists, you have the designers, you have the developers, you have the
Yeah.
project managers, you have the change management, you have, I don't know, there's so many labels. Even I had so many labels in my career, seemingly doing the same thing, but just insanely being put. Sometimes I was sitting with strategy, sometimes I sit with design, sometimes with management. It's quite crazy.
So
And
would
at
you,
the
would
same
you say
time,
that simplifying, is it simplifying
I
things?
think simplifying is probably a good thing because the world we're trying to solve is going to be more and more complex. If we're going to keep
Yeah.
developing more and more complex languages, we're running into an exponential problem.
Yeah.
So if I, for example, look at what I do as a transformation person, service designer, design thinker, whatever, I still have people like business analysts, systems thinkers, transformation managers, what else? Enterprise architects, business
Mm,
designers. Oddly enough, all these practices are essentially trying to do the same thing. They're using slightly different tools. They're using slightly different language. And sometimes it's a bit of a difference between if you're more or less using quantitative or qualitative data to inform your decision-making process. All of this, in theory, these people all need to meet in a room. And I've been trying to enable that a little bit with some of the conversations I've been having now, reaching out to other practices. Because I don't believe that service design or design thinking should sit where it is,
right.
because it itself says we want to be inclusive, right? So we should be the first ones to go and include everyone else. And I've spent so many hours and lots of projects with it, let's say enterprise architects or other practices, just sitting there agreeing on what words we're going to use to describe certain things in the process. And it's insane, right? So that's the thing that needs to
Yeah.
get really, really worked on, because once we do that, we can agree quicker, implement things quicker, because we're all in this together. We're actually all working on the same problem to build better organizations.
Yeah.
Just for some reason, we don't really know each other, and we like to talk to ourselves and our close colleagues rather than someone from another practice background. And it's an issue, and I like doing it because I love to see the similarities and the differences, right? And I'd like to spend the rest of my life just figuring out what works and what doesn't to build the perfect middle ground that actually everyone can understand, sort of something
Yeah.
that can truly reach the mainstream, really, because we all work in a very niche area here.
Yeah. I think the book does that very well. I think it begins to sow the seeds for a better way of working, and things that we're talking about right at the moment, talking about the, where should we start when we're looking to build a solution? We've got to start with the customer and the client and their behaviors. Well, their behaviors at the moment are going to be perhaps slightly erratic. They're going to change dramatically. So then we've got to start thinking in a more wicked way to address that, because it's going to keep moving, isn't it? We no longer have this linear tame path. And then
exactly.
Yeah, and
then sorry, go on.
Yeah, go on.
Sorry. So in a way, when I published the book last year, because I picked up the term wicked problems, which comes, I think, more from systems thinking and way back then in connection with design thinking, I thought, like, okay, I'm a bit sort of ahead of the curve in a way that no one talks about this quite yet, because everyone talks about customer centricity and digital transformation. No one talks about this in an iterative moving target kind of way. They think, oh, we're just going to upgrade our ecosystem, we improve some capabilities, and then we're done. And I was like, no, I know we're not going to be done yet. This is going to keep evolving. We're in the middle of something that we're so far away from, and it will become more and more complex, because the tools we keep building, making things exponentially more complex, and therefore the behaviors will become more complex and shifting around. So it will be that thing. So I was like, okay, wicked problem is a really great way to describe it, but no one talks about it. No one uses that word yet. It's a very old thing from back 50s, 60s, but it sort of got forgotten. So when I decided to bring it back with a book, I was like, it'll take me 3-4 years before anyone really understands what I mean by that and the gravity of this, right? And yet now we're since February, March, we're now talking about COVID-19, and suddenly people start talking about wicked problems.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It's like, yes, and not just that it affects our health in this case, it affects business, right?
Yeah,
there's these second and third dependencies on all this stuff, and that's typical what a system and a wicked problem does. If you know that this is going to happen because this is the problem you're looking at, you will be better prepared, because you will start thinking like, hang on a second, we can't just stop on the first thing we figured out. We know there's going to be a second and a third one coming, or because we've put something in, we will affect something ourselves, and we should be prepared for this, right? That's the big gap. So I'm really it's an oddly good time for that term to discuss it. So hey, I'm the only guy lucky here on this planet at this moment to have picked something that might whose time might have just come.
Well, hence we're having this conversation, because it popped into my head, and I think you used a really good word there. I hear a lot. The word change is used a lot. Okay, change is the only constant. We're in a period of change, but actually, I think you just used the word evolve and evolving. Now, that's a better word, because this is evolving all of the time. Businesses do not know. So understanding whether you're taking a tame approach to it or a wicked approach to it is probably vital to the survival of your business and what you're doing. So so looking around at the moment, for what you're seeing going on in the media and on LinkedIn and wherever, do you think people are you seeing examples of people approaching tyranny in a tame way, or are you seeing people apply wicked thinking? What you see, what sort of balance are you seeing?
So without getting too political about it, but obviously, because it's a global thing, it tends to be political at times. So it's interesting to look at maybe more likely, this is much talked about, is the US reaction towards the pandemic in contrast to how other countries are dealing with it. Because the US is such a big and polarizing country that you actually have both extremes pretty much present and actually coming out at the same time.
Right.
So the tame aspect obviously is the government in this case. So the leadership there is absolutely classic, old-fashioned, it hogs on to its power, and you know, it is slow, if not unable, to really react to the project at hand.
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't even know where that it should focus on the people. It focuses on the economy, on the things, because it hasn't even tested the fact that, hang on a second, maybe if we get people healthier quicker, then maybe we can kickstart the economy again, rather than trying to, you know, hang on to this economy focus and then dumping more and more money onto it. And you can't kickstart it because people are dying, right?
Mm.
So the government, the leadership in the government, there's a perfect example of tame approach to it on the ground, because people are literally very desperate, running out of anything they actually need to solve this. You're starting to see suddenly a very wicked approach to solving it. So you have people where, you know, they're starting to build makeshift safety equipment.
Right.
Companies who never done this before. I think Tesla did a bit of a thing. I don't know how much it was PR, but they started to, you know, we're going to look at building ventilators.
Yeah.
We have not done so, but we're going to give it a shot.
Mm.
And that's better than anything. That's like nearly pivoting or being super flexible and going, you know what, we're going to grab any information we can, because we know the problem enough that this is what we need to bring to it, to
Great.
maybe make it a bit better. So we'll give it a shot, right? And that's exactly sort of this wicked approach, by saying we'll take a risk that we know will make it at least some step better, you know. And you suddenly see organizations or people coming together, you know. There's so much happening online, where then you have these self-organizing teams. So you have a lot of people coming together to the UK is their great example. So there was a call out from the government for people to help the NHS,
Yeah.
and 500,000 people signed up, right? All volunteers, and they do anything from, you know, I think helping closer to healthcare activities, all the way down to bringing food to people who can't go out themselves anymore and who have no one else who can bring it to them. Simple stuff, right? And the simple stuff is often, you know, when you look at MVPs, at simple little experiments and tests, it's like, well, all you need to know is, like, you go to the shop, you call them up first what they need, and you bring it over. And before you know it, you solve a part of the problem, right? With a small little thing, a cheap, small little step. And you take 1,000 of those, and before you know it, you're in a much better state. So you don't have a big strategy and a big thing and a big thing, and a big, you know, investment. No, you know, you atomized it, you decentralized it, and you do a lot of little experiments, and then you talk to each other and tell each other what works best.
Yeah,
and then
really
you just go
interesting.
with it. You know, so that's the experimentation thing that a lot of smart companies are really doing a lot. And you know, we can see it now on the ground naturally. If the challenge and the incentive is big enough to do something, oddly enough, people tend to do that. That's how organizations were built first. I like to remember working for Nationwide last year, and Nationwide has a beautiful organizational story, trying to help people buy a house who alone couldn't afford it. So they had a bunch of guys sitting together, probably in a pub, and say, hey, we all can't individually buy one. So we pool our money together so that the first one can buy one. And then out of that, we manage to finance the next one. So actually, you know, coming together with a big problem, trying this, trying something else, like, let's stop thinking about myself. Let's stop stopping what I know, and go a bit outside of that, right? And that again is experimentation. You start coming up suddenly with different ideas. You bring people together. You know, data shows that a bunch of people who are not in the same practice, who are coming from different areas, are able to de-risk and come up with generally more valuable solutions than single skilled teams. That's a given, right? We have science on this. So you know, and we see some of that with the COVID situation right now, and that's brilliant to see. So it's good to see they both exist.
Yeah.
I think the question going forward is, like, how much are we going with this flexible, quick way? How much are we going to recognize that that's actually the thing that works? I think at the moment it becomes a bit quite evident that that's the stuff where people actually get shit done. You know, where when the governments are dragging their feet and go like, that's another 1,000 people dead there, whereas we've been working on the ground and we just saved 100 people, right? It could be quite evident, or it could be maybe fall back, who knows. But people starting to say there will be it won't be normal anymore, which I translate into we won't be going back.
Well,
We will go forward, which I think
then
is a good thing.
the way where we are right now, maybe those companies, maybe those individuals working will, the ones that will come out of this as the most successful at the end will be the ones who continue to evolve and understand that and keep working in that way, because they know it will keep changing and we are now in a different environment, whereas those that keep throwing the same ideas or fixing it in a more makeshift way, let's put a band-aid over it, they're the ones who might not survive in reality.
So the
Marcus,
question always is, oh, sorry, okay.
I was going to say, I think that brings us to a really nice, perfect end there. I think we've got to that point where we've looked at behaviors, communication, evolving, understand the difference between tame and wicked. And your analogy of the US in the corona moment was great. It really sums that up. So I think if we will sort of wrap things up there and just say, for anyone who wants to learn more about tame and wicked problems and the approach and Marcus's book, you need to get in contact with him. Obviously, I will put all the links to the book and how to contact Marcus in the comments. But I just want to say, Marcus, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for joining me. And should anything come out of the back of this, we'll do another one.
To be awesome. Thank you, Simon.
You are most welcome. Have an awesome rest of the day, and thanks again. Cheers, Marcus.
You too. Ciao.
Bye.